The first person in TFT this set to hit Challenger basically one-tricked Ambusher Camille Reroll. It's an extremely powerful composition that still hasn't gotten nerfed despite there being multiple patches on launch week. And many people, including ourselves at TFT Academy, rate Camille as the #1 comp in the game currently. In this episode of In Too Deep, we're going to show you how to one-trick Camille Reroll all the way to Challenger and show you a really high roll game just to showcase just how high the ceiling of this comp can be. This is the basic progression of an Ambusher Camille line. You're going to start off with playing a core set of units around Powder, Camille, Steb, and Trundle. And this gives you 2 Ambusher, 2 Scrap, 2 Bruiser, and 2 Enforcer. And that's a really good core to play around while adding other units. At level 5, if you find Smeech, throw them in. Otherwise, just add in more Enforcers. At level 6, you're probably going to transition out these frontline units to end up being Sentinels with Loris. And if you hit Scar, great. Maybe sometimes you hit Echo if you're rolling on 6. On level 7, you definitely add Echo and add some of those 4 costs like Garen. At level 8, ideally you add Jinx, but a lot of times you're going to add in the Sentinel because it's just going to be hard to find Jinx on 8. And then level 9, you cap out with 5 Ambusher. You're always going to want to be playing 5 Ambusher. The item build for Camille is pretty straightforward. She really wants 2 Hands of Justice because she's a hybrid unit. She benefits from getting both AD and AP, and that's exactly what Hand of Justice gives, especially when you're above 50% HP. Titans, for the same reason, gives you a bunch of AD and AP. It's pretty much just all the stats that Camille wants. If you don't have it, you can go for Edge of Night, Bloodthirster, and Quicksilver. These are all flex items, but they're worse, in my opinion, for Camille than going for Biss. Also, one thing to note is that Hand of Justice, the component is a glove, and that is really good for ambushers because that gives them more crit strike chance that amplifies and works off of their traits. Same thing with Smeech, except Smeech actually does want Edge of Night because he kind of hops around and kind of gets into the enemy backline a little bit too quickly. So dropping aggro can be really clutch for this Edge of Night because of how much damage he deals. You just want to make sure he gets a little bit safe. And I also think that Smeech is better with Stairs Gauge by a lot than Camille because Stairs Gauge is mainly flat physical damage and Camille doesn't really want physical damage, only she wants both AD and AP, which can be really good. And then for the priority number 2 is just if you get a bunch of belts and utility items, just put them on Garen. Garen scales off of HP, so given things like Warmog, Sunfire, Even Shot, etc. And if you do end up getting a situation where you can play around Jinx, just put AD items onto Jinx to have a high cap. The other thing about it is that Camille is really good with artifacts, and that is the example gameplay that we're going to show later on because I want to demonstrate how powerful it can be with artifacts, especially if you're high rolling. Camille's best tier 1 artifacts by far are Silvermere Dawn, Prowess Claw, and Spectral Cutlass. If you open this at 2-1, you can commit to Camille immediately, even if you have 0 Camille's, in my opinion. Tier 2 are items that are good for her, but it shouldn't be an item that you open up and think, okay, it's a Camille game. It's something that is good if you open up an Anvil late in the game and say, hey, I have already committed to Camille. What can I play on her? Zonia's, Defiance, Gold Collector, all just thumbs up good stuff. And then tier 3, Mittens and Infinity Force. These are decent, but I personally think that they're so middle of the road that they don't really move the needle that much. I would consider it some, but maybe not hard commit if I opened up at 2-1 and maybe think of something else. The main condition for when you're going to play Camille is if you get an early Camille drop and good Camille items. If you have early Camille too, you can also play for a win streak. I've seen a lot of people play around this core and have a lot of success. You also prioritize 3-item Camille first, like the Hand of Justice. A standard game of Camille is going to level to 6 at 3-2 and roll for upgrades. And if you're really far ahead, if you're win streaking, you can also consider just streaking all throughout stage 2 and stage 3 and then rolling on 7 instead. It's a little bit of a contentious topic amongst top players, but in my opinion, I prefer to roll on 6. But I know a lot of people who want to roll at 7 if they're really far ahead. When you do roll on 6, stop when you upgrade Camille and your frontline units, like maybe you hit 2-star Sentinels or 2-star Bruisers. Econ back up and slow roll above 50G, and when you finish, then level to 7, look for Smeech 3 and the 4 cost. Be aggressive if needed. This is usually like protecting your HP total. If you're at like 40 HP or below, you might have to roll below 50 really often and just like, roll from 30 to 10 and then econ back up and then roll from 30 to 0 instead of just waiting at 50 for max interest gold. You have to be more aggressive if you're low HP and behind. Some augments that are really good for this composition. Artifact chasing is really good. So Latent Forge is powerful. Artifactory is insane if you're able to get like the good combos onto her. Ambusher +1s are always really powerful as well to get the 5 Ambusher online. And you get some really fun combos. You can put Ambusher onto other units. For example, one unit that I really like is Ambusher Vi when you hit Reunion and you get a free Echo. So it ends up being really powerful for your traits. Support items are really good in general for melee. Free rerolls are always good with crafting. And if you get good item augments like Not Today or Mace's Will to just help you get early game slams, that's always good. One thing I want to give a shout out to is Max Cap. This is an augment that bails out reroll comps a lot at 4-2. You get a huge econ spike, and yeah, you cap out at level 7, but you get 8 unit spots, which often is enough to secure the top 4. You won't really win the game very often, but it might just save your game from like, a 6th or 7th and definitely get you that top 4 spot that you really want. The number one anomaly that everyone goes for is invisibility. People are willing to roll 40, 50, 60 gold for invisibility at times because of how insane it is. But you usually only do this if you're super far ahead, or you're in a position where you already have Camille 3 and you recognize that this is probably the main way you win. 8 tier are things that are strong enough to stop, and I often end up picking these kinds of things pretty decently as well because I'm just not trying to hard force invisibility every single time. Even though invisibility got nerfed from 4 to 6 seconds, it's still really good, and many people consider it to be S tier and still willing to roll all their gold for it. 8 tier are anomalies that are strong enough where you can stop. I really like Last Chance. I think this is just like a super Radiant Edge of Nights that ends up being really good, and as long as you have the Omnivamp, that health loss is not a big deal. You end up a lot of times being low HP while rerolling in general, and that ends up being very true about Camille. Comeback Story is quite good for that. And Berserker Rage, Camille ends up scaling really well off of the AD and AP, and when you're below 50 HP, guess what? Hand of Justice also kicks in with Omnivamp, so ends up having good synergy with her items. And then the beats here are like, low goal situations where you don't really get to be picky, so consider things like Into the Unknown, where if you are low gold, but you have the HP to sack, coming back with 50 AP and AD is a lot for Camille. The finisher is always a generic safe choice. This is always just fine to help get past tanks really quickly. And then Bully is pretty situational because you have to make sure no one else is really rerolling a 3-star tank, so that way you don't get stuck on it and lose damage amp, but 18 base is still perfectly serviceable. We're going to hop on board with Wasianiverson, who is one of the most accomplished North American players ever. He's made it to 3 world championships. He got 3rd in one of them, and is largely considered to be one of the top 3-4 best players in North America at all times. And he is really good at this Camille line. He's played it a lot to his Masters climb. He's one of the first Masters players in North America and is currently doing pretty well in the Box Bootcamp. He's in a lobby with some really good players, Dish Soap, Kathy Soju, and some other well-known challenger players. And he gets a Camille out of an orb, which is quite good. And kind of like what we discussed before, which is you want to play Camille when you have that early direction of her. You get like her out of an orb. You have good items for her. It all kind of implies that you would have a good early start for it. If you have 0 Camille's, no good Camille items, that's a bad spot for it. I wouldn't recommend forcing it, although we did show you the profile of the person that did do that. We're going to hold on to these watch units. We're going to hold other pairs just to do our due diligence. Even if you are mentally committed to Camille, you still want to hold some of these units on the bench just in case you got direction. He has 3 Enforcer, for example, with the Camille, Steb, and the Maddie. And if you got an Enforcer emblem, that would be 4 Enforcer. So yes, he's open to the idea of Camille, but doesn't necessarily just want to full commit immediately. Can maybe even pick up a Mumu pair. His items are sword, glove, and vest. Pretty unlikely he's going to be leaning into things like the Morgana pair, but we'll go ahead and see. All right, let's go ahead and pause on these augments and take a look. So Heroic Grab Bag is pretty great for reroll in general, for low cost reroll, because it gives you the duplicators, which are pretty high value, and you have 9 gold as well, so it gets your interest threshold rolling and snowballing. The nice thing about Heroic Grab Bag as well is that not only can you use it for copies number 8 and 9 of Camille, you can also use it at the very beginning. I think that's probably a controversial play, but I've seen a lot of people do that for other units in the past. In the previous set, for example, people used it on like Wukong Jinx. They would have like Wukong 2 with Heroic Grab Bag and just start snowballing and win streaking. So that's definitely a possibility that is available to him. But I'm not entirely sure if he's going to be that bold, because I know some players think that's a very bad play. I think Disho, for example, told me that he'll like never do that. Scavenger is like a snowball augment where if you are able to kill things quickly, you're able to get items onto your champions, and you have to make sure that the champions are often worth itemizing as well. So, Scavenger would be really good in a composition like Built Different, where you only get so many items, but you're going to be playing so many units that are buffed, and you're playing all these like 4 costs with no synergies. I like Scavenger in like a setup like that. Not really an early game choice, in my opinion, and not really a choice from this spot, because you're trying to hyper carry like Camille. You're trying to focus all of your items into one area. And Scavenger is much more about like, well, I kill a unit, and then all of a sudden the items spread out to my whole team. How good is the rest of the team? Right now, not very good. Spirit Link is pretty poor. I think Spirit Link, every 10 missing player health, you get max HP healing. Doesn't really do anything right now at the beginning of the game. And if you were to pick it, it'd be at 4-2. But even for a composition like this, we care about the burst and survivability. And 5 seconds is just, for 5% HP, is just not worth it right now. Wasian rolls options 2 and 3. And I don't think either of these are really good for Camille either. Caretaker's Favor, gain a component anvil when you reach 5, 6, 7, 8. That's for playing around 4 costs. Maybe around some 5 costs, you know, when you're playing like a deep vertical. But Caretaker's Favor is, you're not going to get a lot of value for half of your augment until later in the game. So not something that you want right now. And then Paint the Town Blue. We're not playing Rebels. I mean, it's pretty good for Rebels, but this is a Camille Ambusher strategy, which is not applicable. So we take Heroic Grab Bag, and we have an Amumu 2. He scouts around to see what his opponent's board strength is looking like. And Wasian pulls the trigger on the double duplicator Camille. And again, this is a play that I don't see a lot of people make, but we talked about how you want to play for win streak if you get an early Camille 2. I mean, this is one way you can get that Camille 2. And he has a slamable item immediately. And as long as he's able to finish off this glove item, which there's a handful of ones that you could want, Hand of Justice being the best, of course. From here, he's going to be able to most likely put together a streak with Camille. In the best case scenario, he 5 streaks on stage 2, has a bunch of gold. He's making 10 right now. So if he wins, it's 10, what makes 17, 18, 25, 26, 34. He can get to about 50 gold and win streak all at the end of stage 2 if everything goes perfectly. So a really bold play, but you know, it's really cool to see him actually go for this. I don't think a double level here makes sense. He ends up replacing the Amumu 2 with the Steb, and this is because if he does win, he can actually sell this to make 20. I forgot about the value on the bench. He can actually make 20 this turn if he wins. And I think this is a play that also is, you know, to his credit, is scouting around to see if it's even possible to do so. But Camille is quite good because if she's able to get this Enforcer Snipe onto the high HP target unit, she just gets a lot of extra HP and damage amp, which is very, very nice. It's a little close though. Oh, goodness gracious. We do not get the win here. And it looks like this Draven's going to finish us off. That's kind of a disastrous scenario. Okay, so this is the argument against doing it. Okay, so I was open-minded. I was optimistic about it because I was like, you know what? You know, maybe it's, you know, he's a better player than me. Watch him pull off this tempo play. His opponent ended up hitting a Draven too, getting 2 slammable items. I kind of thought he'd be able to squeeze it out there, but unfortunately, falling a little bit short there is really devastating because now he uses duplicators. We're going to have to see how he's actually able to navigate the situation now that it kind of blew up in his face. Going up against an opponent with Bruiser with the setup on Maddie, looking like that he's going to go up against Twitch Bruisers from Dish Soap. And wow, gosh, Camille actually loses this fight as well. Okay, so I think it's now safe to assume that this is not actually the play that I think Wasian was hoping for. But the silver lining is that he'll have a tier that he can actually grab on the carousel potentially and finish his item on Camille, which is still really important. Now, that being said, we have Hand of Justice and Edge of Night, and that's a really powerful combo, especially early here. So I think that he should be favored to win the next 2 matchups because this Camille 2 with 2 items and a Hand of Justice is great. And Hand of Justice is just so much better than like Bloodthirster because Camille scales off of both ability power and attack damage, and Hodge gives both, which is far superior in my opinion than Bloodthirster. But the trade-off of Bloodthirster is that you get that shield, which is really, really nice. We get that win, and we also hit a Enforcer core here, so we can play 4 Enforcers, gives us more damage amp and HP, kind of just puts all the emphasis back in onto Camille. We also have Ambusher in, which is huge. That allows Camille to crit, which is a really big part of maybe why we struggle to get past some of those tanks. And now goes up against a player who's playing all 1-star. I can see why Wasian thought he could. You know, if he was able to put that 5 streak together, everything would have lined up really cleanly, and he could have made that 50 if he ended up not trying to push for tempo. But his spot is still not bad, right? He only lost a couple of fights by a few units, and so he's still really healthy. I see a lot of Camille players end up, you know, starting the game towards the bottom at 70, 75 HP. And it puts them in a really tough situation where they feel like they need to hit or they're going to struggle a lot for the rest of the game. So he's playing high tempo reroll, which is, you know, I think a strategy that a lot of people underrate. So we find a Smeech and we have the Scar in shop. One thing that's important to note is that even though Scar is part of the composition, he's not holding it because Scar can't really go in until later into the game. Scar is only important if you activate either of his traits like Firelight and Watcher. And we're not really trying to play around the Watcher right now because there's just nothing to pair it with. Usually you put Scar with, say, a Garen, and you're not trying to go for Scar 3. So he's very wisely prioritizing to come back for Scar later on. And I think that's a really important part of Reroll. You don't just pick up every unit as part of the composition and hold it no matter what. Sometimes it's costing you too much gold, and you have to realize that you'll come back for it later. We get a bow and a belt drop. Probably not going to be very useful here. The bow ends up making a Titans, which is great, and the belt can just be an item for Garen, or you could use it for a Sterix Gauge, for example, with a sword. Important note, as we talked about, Sterix Gauge is not necessarily a good item for Camille. It's better for Smeech, because Camille is a hybrid champion. All right, let's talk about the 3-2 augment, which is Prismatic, Dark Alley Dealings, Coronation Artifactory. Suspicious Trenchcoat is an S tier augment and artifact for anything that has low mana and the melee carries can kind of convert off immediately. Part of the reason why it was so good on Violet, for example, before she got giga nerfed in the C patch, is because she has a low mana pool from family, and so she would split and then be able to cast very easily and do it like a jab uppercut. So she would split, 3x cast, and then kind of like burst everything down, especially at 4-star. And Bessa is really good with it for that same reason. Vi is still really good with it for that reason. They're all low mana. Camille's a little bit on the higher mana, so Suspicious Trenchcoat not nearly as effective. And you don't want to waste another slot by playing like Trenchcoat and, you know, blue buff or a Protector's Vow to help her cast faster. Just not worth it at all. Coronation is really interesting. Gain a Tactician's Crown. All versions of like Spatula and Pan combinations, a Crown, Shield, and Cape is like Spatula, 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 Pan, Pan, Pan. Those are just like all those variations. Grant the holder 30% attack speed, 30% attack damage, and 40% ability power, which is basically equivalent to like, you know, like a Giant Slayer or a Guard Breaker level of item. So it's like pretty decent, but it also gives you +1 to the team size. It's actually not that bad of an item onto Camille because she can use both the attack damage and the ability power. But the problem is that we don't actually have ability to use the +1 team size that well. This is much better for a bunch of flex traits. I'm thinking, you know, Emissaries or Black Rose that wants to go 3, 4, 5 Black Rose. Coronation is like really good in setups where you can use that extra slot. Right now, what would we use it for? A 4th Ambusher, which is Echo. We're not going to hit Echo for a while. Or Jinx, which, again, we're not going to hit very well. And so we can splash in like a Bruiser, a Scrap Unit, a Sniper. That's not going to help Camille hyper carry, so probably not Coronation. Artifactory is an insane augment for any carry that can use a multitude of artifacts. And we showed you a list of them. So, I mean, we can cut to the chase. Artifactory is an exceptional pick here. It is weaker than What the Forge because you have to wait 1 turn before you can get to it. But the upside is you get to choose to keep certain items. So in the past, when you used Artifactory or What the Forge, if you didn't get anti-heal and any Sundering or Shred, you just couldn't really deal with it because all items transformed. Now you get to choose, but the delay is a really big deal. He thinks for a while, rolls 1 and 2. Sword Overflow is much better for sort of the dual AD carries that wants a lot of swords. I'm thinking Scrap, for example, with Gangplank and Corki that want basically, you know, 5 BF swords, right? You want Deathblade, i.e. Giant Slayer on like all of them. So I think that's like for that comp. For this comp, it's actually interesting because you do want a few swords, but 5 is a little too much. So I just don't think you want that many swords in Camille. You want like 3. Investment is an augment he could consider for rerolling, but the problem is then he has Heroic Grabback and Investment. He has 2 Econ augments, and he's just going to fall off when people have combat augments or really powerful item augments and just outscale him. So it's got to be Artifactory here. All right, so we pop our first artifact, and we get offered Lichbane, Anima Visage, Glacial Crest, and Infinity Force. There's only really one pickable one here for Camille, so it's Infinity Force. I anticipate him to make this item. He actually makes it onto the unit on the bench and sells it. There's actually a little trick. You can actually combine it in your planner. If you just literally click the bow and over the belt and hover it and drop it, it actually makes it without having to sell units, but that's just like a neat little trick there for anybody who hasn't used the item bench in it. All right, let's see what this Nasher combines into, and it's a Silvermere Dawn, which is just utterly insane. Just look at his reaction. I mean, that's what that's the juice. That's the juice right there. And interestingly enough, Silvermere Dawn means that you don't have to put this Edge of Night onto her because you get so much defensive stats that you benefit from having more units attack you, and then she can cast now. So the Hand of Justice heals her back up, and the Silvermere Dawn gives her that tankiness that you don't really need the Edge of Night to be under anymore. And instead, you could put on Smeech, and Smeech is a lot more vulnerable because he jumps to the back and gets targeted. And now all of a sudden, this spot has turned into an insane spot. We're winning stage 3 pretty convincingly. We are win streaking. We're at 94 on fire right now, and we're very, very rich. So I think this spot is amazing. Now, here's the point where it becomes a little bit tricky, which is, should he be rerolling at 6 or 7? And this is a rare scenario where I think that he could justify going to 7 and rolling because of how rich and far ahead he is. A lot of times you roll on 6 because you need to keep up with the tempo of the lobbies, because you need to hit Camille 2, and you're not stable enough on Camille 2. So you roll, you upgrade, but because he has so many different artifacts, he has that option of going to 7. He can also just roll here and just try to like go down to 50 and try to pick up the Camille's. But I do think that he has the option to go to 7 in this game. And he's actually going to 7 very early. And now we get the wind up monkey result, which is a masterwork upgrade. And he can now upgrade. And now he has Radiant, Hand of Justice, Silvermere Dawn, and an Infinity Force. And you know, the thing about it is he doesn't actually have to roll any other items. He basically just has his items done on Camille. If he chooses to use Artifactory for other items, it's because his components are useless. Let's say he gets dropped, you know, Rod, tier, and those are items that are very difficult to use. I guess he can make one Hand of Justice, but let's say in a situation where he can't make that, he can just try to convert that into an item. Late game, if he's on a carousel situation where there's no useful items, he can convert those items as well. I do like that he leveled for this Ambessa as well, because Ambessa is just a really good splash for Emissary. Her Emissary effect gives you resistances, so it just kind of makes Camille a little tankier. Those are the kind of splashes you really want to think about this set, which are, is it actually helping buff my carry, right? Everything's about buffing your carry and your tank this set. The Anomaly set mechanic is about trying to make those even stronger. All your splash traits are to help support that. So, and now this spot has become completely illegal. I mean, this spot, if anything, might be a little too high roll to show you guys, but it's just to give you a good example of why it can be so good to have artifacts onto Camille. A situation where you're not just, you know, rolling above 6, you can go to 7. So Wasian gets Horizon Focus. This combination of Horizon Focus and Silvermere Dawn is pretty insane. Horizon Focus says stunning an enemy causes them to take damage 30% of their max HP. So if you stun them, it's great. And Silvermere Dawn says whenever you attack them, you stun the target. So if you combo these two, every single time you attack, you deal 30% of their max HP as true damage. So Wasian is going to lock in and load. And yes, that's right. He has an insane setup here. He can make a second Hand of Justice. Everything is looking amazing so far. And I fully anticipate him to be in the driver's seat because now he just has to hit Camille 3. He has Smeech 2. He rolled at 7. He's in a really good spot. His odds for Camille are still at 30%. And I would be very surprised if he doesn't at least top 2 this game. I mean, it doesn't mean that his comp is unbeatable if other people are able to hit other crazy Exodia combos. But this is the real juice right now. So we're here at 4-2. We have Item Collector, Find Your Center, and Band of Thieves. Item Collector is the augment that scales based off how many items you have. And because we have Artifactory, we have a few more items than we usually do. And, you know, we've have 3 full items plus a Prowler's Claw, by the way. A Prowler's Claw is pretty insane on Camille. Wow, he's actually just hitting everything, which is, okay, bananas. But Item Collector is higher value than average right now. So it's actually not a bad silver at 4-2. And specifically, Item Collector would be wanted to take it at 4-2, not really at 3-2 because you don't have as many items. Find Your Center is also exceptional for hyper carries, especially for hyper carries who you're not concerned about being left in the front center, and Camille is really good about that. If you're playing Find Your Center for another carry, let's say you're playing it for like Nocturne or Akali or some other like one cost, maybe you're playing like a hero augment, it can be a little bit dicey because sometimes you don't want them to be front center. But Camille with Horizon Focus and Silvermere Dawn and the Fist of Fairness, I don't mind it at all. So I really like Find Your Center in this spot. There's a lot of synergy, by the way, as well, with the amount of HP that you get, plus the resistances that you have on those items. Band of Thieves is generically good as well. And you can also think about it as this can turn into another artifact. So if he was in a situation which is a lot worse and he was much more desperate, you could take Band of Thieves, convert that into something else, and then, yeah, go for that. So he rolls options 1 and 3. Lineup is an augment that actually is pretty decent for melee as well. It's not bad because if you just line up, 7 units, you get a pretty good amount of armor and magic resistance. It's not nearly as good as some of the other resistance and stuff in the past, but it's like okay for like an almost all melee comp. Pandora's Bench is just way too late in the game for that, so it's probably not. But I think Find Your Center here is exceptional. Okay, so we're going to roll here and look for copies of Camille. And I think he's just seeing if he can get any easy upgrades. Finds a Loris and a Smeech. He's at 6 Camille's, 5 Smeeches. Things are looking good. He's stopping here. He has Garen on the Find Your Center. I'm not sure if he wants to move that over. Probably just too busy kind of checking the stats. I think he's trying to evaluate right now if he wants to Prowler's Claw on that Camille versus something like Horizon Focus. And the Horizon Focus actually can be put onto somebody else. You could, for example, put it on Scar, and Scar actually stuns 3 targets. That might actually be a way for him to get Horizon Focus value while also utilizing Prowler's Claw onto Camille, which I think Prowler's Claw Camille is really great. It helps her get past the front line. Prowler's Claw, if you kill a unit, will dash to a target a few hexes away, and that's really good because that gets you to kill 1 tank and then get to the back line, as opposed to having to kill every single tank and then get to the back line. And it looks like he agrees. So he's actually going to remove, and instead of putting Horizon Focus onto the Camille, put it onto the Scar, because he's the only other unit that stuns something. Option 3 would have been to put Prowler's Claw onto Smeech, but Smeech already kind of has built-in Prowler's Claw. He's kind of like hopping all over the place. Mobility is definitely not his weak suit. It's more survivability. And now Wasian's just putting his hand on his head. I mean, the game is pretty much put into motion, and if you told me he didn't lose a single round for the rest of the game, I'd believe you. He's screenshotting his board because he's trying to send to his friends because of how unbelievably high roll it is. Oh, I love it. Go ahead and 1.5x this for the rest of the game because I'm pretty sure you know exactly how this is going to go. One thing to note is that he is putting his Garen to buff adjacent to the left and right. Garen wants to buff the left and right most units of him with his emissary bonus, so he's giving it to Scar and to Camille. And Scar, oh wow, he actually lost this fight. You know what, never mind. I thought he was going to win out the rest of this game based off his setup, but ends up taking a loss to Heimerdinger, who's a very good unit. Let's go ahead and take a look at his anomalies as well. Dragon Soul, the champion's first attack against a new target fires a Dragon Soul blast, dealing 20% max HP true damage. Dragon Soul is not bad, but it's kind of slow. 1, we have Sylvanmere Dawn, so it's going to take a long time for her to auto. And 2, we care a lot more about the survivability of Camille because we have so much damage already. And Dragon Soul is really good when you're trying to use it on an attack speed champion to kind of compensate for how fast they're attacking, give them a little bit extra damage. So I don't know if I'm going to be favoring this Dragon Soul here. He rolls to Legacy of Shurima after 10 seconds of combat, ascending, getting 40 max HP and attack speed. That one is also a little bit too slow because we're very front-loaded burst. We want our first 10 seconds to be highly impactful to the point the fights end. So I think this is much more for like Sentinel comps that want to stall out, but not this one. Last chance. On first death, revive to full HP, get 50% attack speed on the vamp, but lose 12 health each second. I actually really like this one. I think this is one where I've personally had success and won games with. So I think this is really good. And it's almost like an Edge of Night because when you die, you drop aggro, so you revive. And if you cast again, you get an opportunity to heal that HP. You might be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose 12.5 HP per second, but that's partially why we have things like the Fist of Fairness and a bunch of the Omni Vamp up so she can get all the HP back. So I personally like this one. Instead of rolling past it, share your energy. This one is okay, it's cute, but we don't really use some of these stats on other units. Heavy Hitter, attacks deal bonus physical damage equal to 20% of the champion's max HP. No thank you. So we ended up breaking down a bunch of the anomaly choices, but he was really targeting invisibility. On the current live patch, this actually has gotten nerfed to 6 seconds, but it's still really good. You still pick it, even though it's nerfed. So just want to point that out there because some people are like it's an old patch. But trust me, it's still extremely powerful. And part of it is because that he knew that if he rolled for invisibility, he wouldn't need Edge of Night onto the Camille because this is basically like, what, every 6 seconds, 30 seconds per fight. It's like having 5 Edge of Night effects onto your Camille. Pretty insane. The downside is we just spent about 40 gold for this anomaly. So all of a sudden our major economic advantage has disappeared. So it's definitely one of those things where it's still looking really good, but that definitely stung a little bit. But I do think that's how some of these reroll comps shine. They really capitalize by having some insanely powerful anomalies. Like everything is funneling power into the Camille. Heroic grab bag to get Camille 3, Artifactory to get the great artifacts and items, Find Your Center to buff, Invisibility to get the dropping the aggro. And now you're just seeing like how this Camille just can't be stopped. And this is a Camille 2. I talked about that how Camille 2 falls off. This Camille 2 ain't falling off. And one thing by the way to note is that it's dropping aggro, which also stops the projectiles from like being able to finish. And so the invisibility is just extremely hard to deal with. And this Camille is basically a complete monster now. All right, so now we're going to roll and look for that Camille 3. All right, so a little bit expensive again. So, you know, we wanted to try and find this a lot earlier so we can push levels and eventually find the Jinx, but not that big of a priority right now. We're going to go ahead and just make another artifact because we kind of talked about the situation before, which is just we have rods and tears and no one really wants those items. You could itemize powder, but I think another artifact can be even better. And now this Camille 3 is completely unstoppable. We're just completely farming every single frontline unit to dash to the backline, assassinating it, and Dish Soap is not even close to killing this Camille at all. The Edge of Night transforms into a Death Defiance. Oh my gosh, when it rains, it pours. He's just getting a crazy amount of artifacts. Now putting the Hodge onto Echo because, you know, he does deal damage. It's 5-3, and it's already almost the end of the game because everyone else is dead, and he's just crushing all of these players. All right, after Carousel, I think he accidentally missed and meant to take an item, but he got a Conqueror emblem instead. A little sloppy. He should just pick the regular item. He's going up against Twitch Mundo, who, yeah, you know, this is one unit he's not actually bursting down. The Mundo never died. Oh, just so, did he use Sponging for Warmogs? So he's using an artifact to spread out across his front line and put so much HP that the Camille can't actually burst it. And so that was like the first loss he's taken in quite some time. Yeah, that's right. Dish Soap has Sponging. And so if Warmog spreads to the front line and all these boosters get Warmogs, it is very difficult to deal with. Ah, it's really clever. I feel like this composition should have no problems dealing with Heimer just because I don't think Heimer can burst it down fast enough and Camille should be able to take everything down. A little bit close. These comps are very strong. So he has an Exodia setup, and yet it still feels like some fights are pretty close / losing. We're going to level 8, and now we're going to roll, hopefully find the Jinx. And also, I think he is trying to stop Dish Soap from hitting a 3-star Mundo, for example. He's holding extra copies of Mundo. Opens an item artifact and sees an Even Shroud. He can use this as actual armor shred because, you know, one of the things that he's lacking in his composition is utility. And he doesn't have to actually turn that into an artifact. Ooh, Camille is dashing around. Ah, Dish Soap's losing to the Heimerdinger player. And we do end up beating Dish Soap's Go. So some close fights. It looks like Dish Soap's going to fall off. And we have no problem beating the Heimer player. So it feels like if Dish Soap dies here, it should be good to go. All right, going up against Dish Soap. Looks like we are still struggling a little with the Mundo, but we are able to get the kill this time. And I think that's huge. Last time we couldn't kill fast enough and everyone ganged up onto the Camille. But thankfully this time it looks like Camille was able to kill Mundo and now we finished off our biggest threat. I think getting the 8, playing that Garen for the extra HP and getting this Even Shroud is a huge deal because before, I think without it, we were weaker and more flimsy. All right, going up against the Heimerdinger with the Cat Mauslahar and the LeBlanc. This is probably going to be the most common AP board that you'll go up against. And normally when you're playing this Camille board, if you're not playing Find Your Center, you really want to just position Camille away from the Scion and the Elise because that tandem wants to chain stun Camille. But in this case, because he has Find Your Center and he has Prowler's Claw, he's not that worried about it. But in the future, if you end up in a positioning situation like this, you usually want Camille to be away from these units, which doesn't get chain stun, so probably on the left. But at the same time, if you have just like Prowler's Claw and you don't have Find Your Center, you can also position her right here, try to dash the backline and assassinate that Heimer as fast as you can. But this should functionally be the last fight of the game. I don't really think that this is enough. Kind of close. Ooh, just barely. So looks like Wasianiverson is going to get that very easy victory and show you why exactly Artifact Camille is insane. So that was an example of quite a high roll game of Camille to show you the very top end of why it's considered to be so dominant. The highs are extremely high for this comp. And if you just play it at a baseline level, you'll see why it's also doing well, even with the basic items and the guide that we showed you. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and hopefully you get some freelo with this comp before it inevitably gets nerfed. So good luck out there, and I'll see you around next time.